Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of 247 DIY, and an episode that I have been super excited to film. I've been sitting on a whole bunch of parts just waiting to get the time so that we can jump back in here on the WRX. If you recall, if you're subscribed to the channel, last winter before the car went on the road last year, we got the Airlift suspension set up in the car here, so now we're all good to go on the air ride. But being under the car and installing a lot of those parts, I realized that there's a whole bunch of parts underneath there that are original, and the underside of the car is looking quite neglected. So while we're not going to be replacing every single component of the suspension right now, mainly just because I don't have a massive budget to spend on the car, I have gone ahead and gotten quite a few suspension components that should help both with this car being lower, as well as just breathing some new life into the underside of the car. So let's jump in. I'll show you the parts we're going to be installing today, and then we can go ahead and get to the work. All right guys, so let's go ahead and dive into all these parts that we're going to be putting on the car today, as well as explaining the game plan of how we're going to go about it. So up first, we have the Super Pro kit here with the STI control arms. I have off camera gone ahead and done them up in this metallic gold color that I do a lot of the accent parts on the WRX with. Now this kit comes with pretty much everything you'll need to go ahead and get these installed. It comes with Super Pro's own anti-lift kit, so that's also good. You can buy this whole kit and you don't have to worry about spending extra money on a different brand anti-lift kit. It all just comes included. It also comes with adjustable end links. We will be throwing these on today, but if you'll notice in that last shot where we panned over all of the parts, there's no sway bars here, and really that's just because the budget I'm working with, I just don't have the money for sway bars right now. So we'll do those another time. When we do those, we'll replace the end links as well, I would imagine. But I have no doubt that these are perfectly good end links. I'm just not a fan of the adjustable ones, so that's the only reason why I'll probably end up swapping them out. But we've got those to go on there, and along the way, you'll notice a ton of hardware where it made sense to, and the OE hardware was reasonable in price and not outrageously expensive. We went ahead and we just picked up a lot of the OE hardware to go ahead and replace the rusty kind of corroded stuff that's on there. There's no sense in throwing really nice looking parts on a car if you're just going to throw crusty old rusted bolts and hardware back on them. So the one thing I am curious about these control arms is pretty much every retailer you go ahead and look at, when you look at these for a bug-eye chassis, in the GD chassis for the bug-eye WRXs, these add a certain amount of caster. Right now, off the top of my head, I can't remember what it is, but when you look at the descriptions from a lot of the retailers, they will point out that these will push your wheel forward in the wheel arch. I did as much Googling as I could find with people replacing these, and no one seemed to take a perfect side-on shot that I could find, because I am kind of nervous that it might look weird, especially with the air ride fully aired out and dropped down. I don't know how far forward it's going to make the wheels push in the wheel well. So that is the one thing that I am just a little apprehensive about with these. However, I'm hoping that it's just going to be a non-issue, because these are going to be super nice to have installed in the car. And then again, we've got just a whole pile back here of OE hardware and stuff that I went ahead and bought. Now, if you're buying OE hardware for your Subarus, you can go to pretty much any Subaru like dealer outlet website. There's a whole ton of them out there. Every single dealership seems to have their own website. My go-to is SubaruPartsDeal.com. Again, you can use any one you want, but I find that when you consider both their shipping costs that they charge and the price for their parts, it really seems to be the best deal. There was another site I used to go through, but they seem to have shut their site down as of last year. So their prices were always the best, but now I can't order from them anymore. So anywhere where there were steel brackets, we went ahead and just got new steel, again, where it made sense to. There are some brackets and a few bolts, and we'll get to those when we get to them, that I didn't buy new because the prices were outrageous for just like a couple of bolts. But for the most part, we have all new OE hardware to go onto these parts here. A lot of them I labeled, so I know where they go for each one of these parts, but then as parts came in, I kind of started getting a little bit lazy, and like this whole pile back here, I didn't mark and match up where it goes. But I do have a Excel spreadsheet that I made when I was placing the order to make sure I got all the parts, so I'll just be able to go through and I'll refer back to those. Now we are going to be dropping the entire rear diff outrigger portion. You'll see that in a minute if you're not familiar with what that is. I want to say around 06 is when they stopped using on the GD chassis. I could be wrong, maybe it's like 08, somewhere around there. But on the outsides, you have bushings in the outrigger. Those are 22 years old now on this car, so we might as well go ahead and get them replaced. And I decided to go with these Powerflex options. The Whiteline options, the Super Pro, I think, has a set. People said they seem to create quite a bit of NVH, negative NVH that people didn't like. So the reason I went with these is they're not a solid poly bushing. You can see those holes in there. And what I'm hoping is with these ones, that will create a decent enough compliance in there where we have a rigid enough bushing to make the suspension feel a little bit better, but not so rigid where it's going to transfer a ton of NVH to the chassis of the car. And then we also have some Whiteline rear subframe lockdown bolts we'll be installing. There's a whole, how do I want to put this? Not controversy, but there's a whole headache of information regarding the rear subframe and the bushings that are in that rear subframe. I won't bore you with it now, but when we get to dropping the rear subframe, I will talk about it because there is a ton of misinformation out there. I got into a huge debate on my personal Facebook page. There's a Subaru group I'm part of. I got into a huge debate with people that seem to think one train of thinking on that. Like I said, we'll get into it when we drop the subframe, but for now I won't bore you with it. And then up here we have the Whiteline front roll center correction kit. This is specifically made for lowered cars. It's your outer tie rod ends as well as ball joints that'll be going in those control arms over there. And these are, in terms of their geometry, these are changed from like the way the OEM ones are made to help a lowered vehicle to correct that geometry and help it handle and feel the way it should. And then we've got trailing arm bushings here. We'll take a look at the trailing arms themselves in a second, but went with a Whiteline again on these. Again, we've got OE hardware for those. You can see I've pre-installed it so I know where these ones go, but we've got both of the forward and the rearward trailing arm bushings here. And then lastly, to round out the parts, we have these Mooresport rear trailing arms. I was super excited to get these in. I don't want to say with 100% confidence that RallySportDirect.com is the only US-based retailer for Mooresport. They're a Canadian company, but from what I saw, I believe RallySport.com, at least in terms of your Subaru and your tuner stuff, is the stateside retailer for that Mooresport stuff. And I couldn't be happier with how Rally Sport Direct handled this. When I was doing my Googling, these are the 1-inch lowering correction arms for the rear end. It looks like years ago they did a 2-inch lowering correction, and we are really low on the WRX, so I kind of wanted that. Rally Sport Direct did a back and forth and contacted Mooresport directly, so basically there was nothing I really had to do on my end talking to two different retailers. It was all handled through Rally Sport Direct. Turns out they just don't make the 2-inch lowering correction anymore. They only offer the 1-inch correctioning, which 1-inch is better than the OE geometry for being on this lowered car. So we went ahead and got these. There are cheaper options in these available, but just like anything, you can go really cheap with suspension stuff and you're risking parts breaking or you're risking parts that just aren't manufactured well. And then there's also quite a few options out there that have like the spherical bearings. Spherical bearings are good, but they're not great for like a street car. Spherical bearings are good for track cars where you don't mind going in and rebuilding and replacing those bearings every once in a while because they just like to collect dirt and grime. I wanted just a standard poly bushing type setup that we could throw in there, not have to worry about maintenance and keeping spherical bearings clean and all that. So we've got our trailing arms here. That's what those Whiteline bushings will be going in. And then lastly, since we're back there and we're going to be dropping the rear diff anyway to do a lot of the work that we're doing, we got a OE STI rear diff support brace here that will be replacing the stock one in there. And then, of course, what I'm going to be doing when the rear subframe and the rear diff outrigger frame come out, just going to be cleaning those up, giving them a good wire wheel, a good scuffing, nothing super crazy, just enough to get the major rust scaling and everything off. Going to hit them with a nice thick coat of Rust-Oleum enamel paint, just to get things looking nice under there. Again, there's no sense in throwing like really nice looking parts on there and having other rusty, crusty, not so great looking components. So pretty big project going on there today. I'll be honest, when I woke up this morning, I was feeling a bit unmotivated, so we are about halfway through the day already. Not 100% sure how much work I'm going to get done today, but I do have all day tomorrow. At the very least, we're going to get the rear end down, get the frames cleaned up and sprayed, and then at that point, probably just let them sit, let the paint dry overnight. I do have a very bad habit when I paint things of wanting to get them installed right away, and then the paint's not quite cured and set up, and you put fingerprints and smudges and everything in it. So we'll let those cure overnight, and at the very least, we'll just get the rear end done today, and maybe the video will go out, maybe not. If I get some time, we'll get the front control arms in, but I just want to focus on the rear end today. So what do we have to do? We're going to get the vehicle up on the lift. We're going to drop the exhaust. I'm going to disconnect it at the downpipe connection. So downpipe back, we're just going to drop the whole exhaust out, drive shaft out, drain the rear diff, get the rear wheels off, and then we will come up with a game plan there on how we want to get the axles out. I want to do it with as little disassembly as possible, and I've never had the rear axles out on this car, so I don't know how much disassembly I need to get the room to be able to pull the axle ends out of the knuckles, but there's only one way to find out, and that's start taking things apart, so let's get to it. I realized I could drop the whole subframe and just have this all down in one shot, but I'm not 100% sure how heavy that's gonna be, and I guess I just like making things more difficult on myself. So yeah, I thought that was gonna work, but it's not. I actually gotta take the wishbone off the back of the diff here, which I'm not sure I can get to those, but we'll see what we can do. That's gonna make things harder too. The whole stud for the rear diff hanger came right out. I'm hoping it doesn't do it on this side, but judging how much rust there is on that end and how easily these came undone, it's gonna come out both sides, which means I'm gonna have to kind of do a little bit of a twister here, holding this rear diff up while I get that those last two bolts on the Outrigger frame down, and then try to lower it down without dropping it. This is where it would help to have a hydraulic transmission jack or something like that, but I wasn't expecting to need it for this project. The next thing that we got to do before we can go ahead and start thinking about getting these rear suspension components painted is to go ahead and get these bushings out of the rear differential outrigger here. All right, guys, and with that, we got both of the factory bushings out of the rear diff outrigger here. I'm gonna go ahead and off camera, just because it's pretty basic stuff, just gonna take some wire wheels and we're gonna go ahead and clean both of these, rear differential outrigger and the rear subframe up, as well as a couple of small parts that I didn't want to buy new simply because of the price. Not gonna bore you with that. Like I said, we're just gonna be getting the rough stuff off with this, and then I'll go ahead and get these hung up. I'll show you the makeshift indoor paint booth that I made, and we'll get these painted. That way we can let these sit and cure and dry overnight, because I am starting to run out a little daytime, so I at least want to get these done and then see if we have time to get anything else done. All right, so I've gone ahead and finished up the rear differential outrigger frame as well as the rear subframe. If you can see in here, it's a bit smoky. That's a combination of paint and burnt rubber. I'll explain the burnt rubber in a minute, but I figured I'd show you. This was my little paint booth that I mocked up just a little while ago. With it being winter here, I can't exactly spray in the back half of the barn. It's just too cold. So get things nice and warm in here. And I've got this little area sheeted off so that I can spray in here. And you can see we've got everything painted with the Rust-Oleum protective enamel. I like using that. You don't have to be absolutely perfect with your wire wheeling to get every last inch of rust. You can spray this stuff on nice and thick, and it does a really good job of preserving the part. Now, it's not going to be perfect. Ideally, especially the two big pieces there, it would have been bring somewhere and have them sandblasted and then even powder coated, but there is still some rust, and what I find is you'll just get little like pitting areas that start to poke through over time, but as a piece, as a whole, this stuff really does a really good job and will keep your parts looking nice for a good long time. And you can see we did a bunch of little parts here that was either like these little guys here, you wouldn't think, but each one of these is $60 a piece. I wasn't going to spend $120 just for these connected bolts here. These little brackets that hold the rear diff and the rear cradle, they're a discontinued part. They do have a new part, but I couldn't quite tell if it was what I wanted because the listing says, like I think it was right hand, but the picture shows that like I think they revised it where it's just one whole piece. But the listing was confusing me because it said right hand side. It was also a little pricey, so I wasn't sure. So I just figured I'll paint these ones up. These are the feet, the rear feet that the lateral or the trailing arms go into. Off the top of my head, I can't remember if it was just these were expensive or if the trailing arms are one piece with these feet. So either way, we went ahead. We got these painted up. And then I kind of forgot about these, but these are going to be bolted to those new trailing arms that we put in. These hold the parking brake cable kind of out of the way and in place, and these run on your ABS sensor wires. So we just got those off, gave them a quick coat of paint just so they look nice when they're bolted up to those new trailing arms. And then lastly, while I had my respirator on, I went ahead and removed the lower knuckle bushings for these trailing arms. I know I didn't film it, but it's this pretty much the same exact process that I did on the Forester a while back. You just heat the center sleeve up like super hot with a torch. The rubber around it will start to kind of bubble, and you might have to try it a few times and then keep heating it. But eventually it'll just get so hot that you just tap it out and it'll just fall out. This one actually kind of like, because everything expanded, it actually squeezed itself right out of there. I didn't even have to really, I think I tapped it once and it just kind of flew out of there. And then you're just left with the rubber bushing inside of there. I just got my Sawzall, cut it in half, and then tapped that out. Now, I did make a little bit of a mistake on this side. Every bushing that I've done on Subarus before has a center sleeve, and I just assumed that there was a center sleeve. So you can see my little Sawzall mark there. I had just sort of blindly started cutting through the rubber bushing, assuming that there was a sleeve there. It doesn't appear on these 02 WRX that there's a sleeve. It's just a pressed in rubber bushing. So a little bit of an oopsie on this side. I don't think it's going to make too big of a deal. The bottom one, I barely scored it at all. The top one is actually kind of deep, but you have all this extra metal up here. I'd be more worried if it was down here. But long run, it wouldn't be the end of the world to want to replace these knuckles, and eventually probably the wheel bearings are going to go bad anyway. So if for some reason this fatigues and breaks, it's one of those things that these parts are still expensive to get like a factory piece, but if it breaks, then it's just an excuse to get some new shiny new knuckles and bearings and everything in here. But this one over here is perfectly fine. So we got that all done up. I'm already getting a headache from being out here with the paint fumes and the burning rubber, so that's why I wanted to get to this point tonight. I can just let everything sit out here tonight, air out, and come back and start working in the morning. So I'll catch you guys in the morning. And we're back bright and early next morning. The sun's barely up right now, so we should have plenty of time to get to work. I got to see how quickly this rear end's going to go back together. Depending on how long it takes, I might wait and do the front end another day. Only because I got to be to work tomorrow morning bright and early, and it would be nice just to have a little bit of time this evening just to kind of sit and relax. But if the rear end goes together real quick, then I'll probably jump to the front end and try to at least see what we can do on that. The problem is normally I would just leave the car on the lift, but after I go back to work, the next time that I've got time off, I need to do some work on the Forester because I'm going to be taking a bit of a long trip, and there's a part I need to replace just to have that peace of mind while I'm taking that long road trip, and I'm going to need the lift with the Forester on that. So I at least need to get to a point today where I'll be able to get the WRX off of the lift. So the first thing I want to do is work on getting that rear subframe back up in the rear end of the car. But we need to do a little bit of prep work before we can get the Whiteline rear subframe locking bolts in place. And you can do it with the rear subframe in, but since we have it out, it's just going to be a lot easier to do it with the subframe already out. And then, like I said yesterday, I do want to go ahead and just talk about a couple things about the bushings in the rear subframe. So here we've got the rear subframe. It's all painted up. It's ready to go back in the car. And you'll see it's got the 4 bushings in the 4 corners here. Now, these bushings aren't replaceable directly like from Subaru. They don't have their own part number. They're actually considered to be part of the subframe itself. If you wanted new ones, factory ones, you would have to order a whole subframe. Now, these bushings are a little bit different than a lot of the other standard bushings that you might see on your Subaru. There's not a lot of rubber. There's barely any rubber. It's mostly a metal bushing with a small amount of rubber. Now, and that rubber isn't there for any type of flex or compliance or anything like that. The only reason it's there really is just to dampen vibrations, to not transfer them into the body. And like I kind of got into initially a little bit yesterday, there are companies that make aftermarket polyurethane bushings, but just because there's companies that might make a part that's available for your car, it doesn't necessarily mean you should install them, and you don't want to be installing those polyurethane bushings, because all you're doing is creating a big thick piece of polyurethane, and no matter how stiff that polyurethane is, it's going to have more flex than these factory bushings, and that's going to allow your subframe to move, which you don't want. These subframes, there's actually an STI version, and the STI version ones have solid metal bushings. There's no rubber at all. It's just a solid piece of metal that's pressed into the frame. I kind of considered getting one because the research I did, it looked like you can still buy them. But it was about $400 for a brand new subframe. I really didn't want to do that. And then also, unfortunately, at one point there was Group N bushings available for these. You could press these old ones out. You could buy the Group N ones and press them in. Unfortunately, those have been discontinued. I only found one company that had them available. It was over in the UK, but then when I looked closer, they only had one bushing available. So outside of that, I was doing a little bit of research. Type RA forums.com, there was a member on there that I had just found through a Google search that said they have a company that makes solid milled ones. I wanted to get on those forums and try to find them and send them a message to see if they would get back to me, but for whatever reason, when I tried to sign up for the Type RA forums, it flagged my attempt to create an account, and it said that it was suspicious, and I tried messaging them, and it just seems like no one answers. So that was kind of frustrating, because it was kind of like that was like the only hope. But I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. Like I said, there's not very much rubber between the metal bushing and the actual subframe itself. But the Whiteline locking bolts that we're going to be installing are going to be a huge improvement to keep this rear subframe locked down and prevent any torsional movement from the compliance from the rubber in these bushings. So the one thing that we do need to do is chase the threads on the holes that are going to be used for those Whiteline lockdown bolts, because they use holes that are already in the chassis of the car, but they're unused holes. So over time, rust and corrosion are going to get in those threads. And my understanding is it's a welded captive nut, like on the inside cavity of the body. And if you break the weld on that, now you have no way to access that nut, and you just have a bolt that's going to be sitting there spinning. So what you want to do is get a tap, get in there, chase that hole. That way you don't run into that problem, and then you can lock this subframe down nice and tight. So let's get those holes chased first, work on getting this subframe back in, and then we'll install those lockdown bolts. All right, so the hole that we're going to be tapping is this center hole right here between your two mounting hole locations for the subframe bolts themselves. It's an M12 by 1.25. Now we're just using this to chase the threads, but you really want to be confident in the fact that you've found those threads, because what you don't want to accidentally do is start cutting new threads by mistake because you didn't actually find the existing threads. All right, and if you were watching yesterday, you'll notice that I struggled a little bit getting the rear subframe down. When I originally kind of planned out how I wanted to get this down, I thought when these lateral links were disconnected, they would kind of swing down. And anybody who's worked on these GD chassis knows that this central bolt, this big long bolt that secures your lateral links in, can be a huge pain in the butt. And I didn't even want to attempt trying to loosen it to see if that would allow these lateral links to come down. So what I did to kind of aid myself today is I've just taken some scrap wood, placed it up there between the air struts and the body just to push the knuckles, the whole hub assembly out, and I think that should give me enough clearance where I'll be able to just lift that subframe in, get the new hardware in there, and go from there. And then the lockdown bolts go right in this empty hole here into that hole already in the body that we already chased the threads for. And one thing that I didn't do, that honestly is just because I was being lazy, that even the instructions say you should do, is loosen your cross member bolts. I already had them in, tightened and torqued down. It will make the installation of these lockdown bolts go a little bit smoother just because they are pretty much a perfect fit to that hole, and if they're out of alignment a little bit, it is a little difficult to get them in there. It wasn't too bad, and they went in pretty easy. That's why I didn't feel the need to come in and back these out. But you may want to go ahead and loosen those up just to make sure these are centered, and that way you don't have to hammer them in quite as hard as I did. Again, I was just being lazy, but they're in there now. And now I'm going to move on. We're going to get the differential outrigger set up and ready to go. So now we can go ahead and get these Powerflex bushings into the outrigger here. And I almost forgot to mention, there is an orientation to these bushings. This is flipped upside down essentially, so the one that we just installed would be the passenger side. That one really has no orientation. Both halves are the same size, you just put them in. But the metal sleeve here on the driver's side, you'll notice is thinner than the other side, and the bushing has two different sizes here on the halves of the bushing. And the thicker one here goes to the body side, so that would be the underside here is where the thicker bushing goes. And then when I came out here this morning and I was getting the shop warm up, I went ahead and I got the nuts off of these studs that ended up backing out of the rear diff here. So we just need to go ahead and get these reinstalled. And now that we have those studs installed into the rear end of the diff, my plan is we'll get this Group N STI rear diff support up here, and then I should be able to put those studs through this support while we attach the front end of the Outrigger frame towards the middle of the car, but that way this will hold it up so I'm not wrestling with it like I was before when those studs backed all the way out. And one thing to note that I noticed as I was just starting to get the hardware ready to get this rear Outrigger frame up in there, these are the factory washers that go on top of those bushings that we just installed, the Powerflex ones. And these little tabs here face down because there's a recess in the top of the stock bushings. There's space for those little tabs to go. The Powerflex bushings don't have a recess for those, and I don't think that these are meant to just like press and puncture down into the bushing. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I did order these new ones, and I just hammered those little tabs down, so this will just end up being a flat washer sitting on top of the bushing. Now we can go ahead and work on getting the Whiteline bushings installed in the knuckles so that we can install our rear trailing arms. And actually, before we go ahead and get these trailing arms installed, I do want to get the axles in first, just so we have that little bit extra room when we're not fighting with the control arms. So we'll get those axles in, and then we can get the trailing arms installed. Now we can work on getting our rear trailing arms at least set up to go in the car. When I install these bolts here, I'm just gonna kind of hand tighten them, just get the nuts on a few threads, and then we'll worry about hand tightening once everything's installed. All right, so let's get these trailing arms installed. If you were really paying close attention, you will have saw in that last clip, I put the feet on the wrong sides of the trailing arms. I just realized as I went to mock these up here, so I swapped them around and we have them on the correct side now. All right, guys, so sorry I had to cut away there. These trailing arms kind of confused me a little bit, only because of the way the bracket here for the ABS cable bracket is. When I first installed these, I had them flipped the other way so that this bracket was more near the top, so that the ABS line bracket was up out of the way like it is on the regular control arms. But then I noticed that the Mooresport logo was upside down. I had misplaced the instructions. It's not really instructions they come with, more just like a technical diagram, but it does show on that one that the M should be right way up and left versus right side. So I had to go and swap everything over, but everything's installed now. I just realized I got to tighten up this bolt and this bolt on this side, but the other side's all done. Everything bolts back up with the ABS line. The only thing you have to modify is the bracket here that kind of just keeps the parking brake cable in place. It has a little tab on it. You'll see it if you undo it. There's a little tab on there, and that indexes into the factory control arms. And if you want it to rest flush against these tubular ones, I just took it over to the vise and I just used my angle grinder and I just nipped off that little tab, that indexing tab. So now the part that comes down here that's behind this bracket sits flush against the tube. But that's the only thing that needs to be modified. Everything else bolts right up in place, and those arms are looking real nice up in there. So now we can go ahead and get these lateral links reinstalled. These will be another component when we do the sway bars. We'll get these lateral links in, and honestly that'll be real satisfying to have nice new sway bars in there, new lateral links. I'm gonna go with the aluminum JDM STI ones when we do the lateral links, and honestly probably Whiteline sway bars. I haven't made up my mind completely yet, but let's get these hooked up back in. If I don't edit it out of the footage, you will have noticed when we did the disassembly, I marked one of the bolts on that side. I actually marked the wrong bolt. I marked the rearward one. I thought that was the alignment bolt, but in the end it doesn't matter anyway, because we painted this subframe, so any witness marks I would have made, we wouldn't be able to see now anyway. So I'm just going to put them in there. I believe there's a 0 degree mark on there. We'll probably just set it to the 0 degree mark, and then obviously once we're all done here, we will have to go and realign everything, but for now we'll just get everything bolted up. So don't try setting your toe until you get this rearward one in, and then don't forget this little washer here to connect the rubber cap that goes on the back of there. And then I went ahead and picked up brand new rubber covers for these rear lateral link bolts. All right guys, so that's all installed. You can probably see there on camera, there's these little dots on either side, and then on the flange of the bolt as well as the washer on the other side, there's little alignment ticks. You can probably see them up along the top, but then on the outsides, kind of 180 degrees from each other, there's these separate notches that line up with those dots on either side. And it looks like that's basically set with a neutral alignment, not towed in, not towed out. So that's how I have it set right now. And of course, when we go ahead and look at getting this thing aligned, that's when we'll adjust those, but it should be neutral tow right now. And then we got the rearward lateral links in there with the new rubber caps on the back and everything like that. So that's about it as far as the new stuff going into the car. And so at this point, guys, I am going to cut the video here on this one. I'll just make it a two-part series. The first part will be the rear end, and then the second part will be the front end doing those STI control arms. I did want to get this all done in one episode. I wanted to get everything done in one weekend here, what would have been 2 days. Really as a thank you to you guys. I had started buying these parts and I was prepared to do this project when I was at 1,000 subscribers, but I just kind of got busy. But 1,000 subscribers was a huge milestone. It means my channel's monetized now. I'm making a little bit of money off the channel, which means that I can throw some better parts on the car, bring content a little bit more regularly, even just with that very minimal flow of income from YouTube. So again, like I said, this really is a thank you to you guys, because it wouldn't be possible for me to be starting to make a little bit of money off the channel if it wasn't for you guys subscribing, commenting, liking the videos. So again, thank you. Thank you for the support, and I will end the video. We just have to throw the last few things up. We got to throw the drive shaft up, the rear drive shaft assembly cover up, and get the exhaust back up. The two things that I did forget to buy for this project is diff fluid for the rear end, so we're gonna go ahead. I gotta buy some diff fluid, and I didn't get a 3-inch 2-bolt flange gasket for the downpipe up there, so I gotta order one of those. But I'll go ahead and do the outro here and then finish up with that work. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit that like button. Feel free to leave a comment below, and if you're not subscribed already, please consider subscribing. Thanks.